Salams, this is People's Dispatch, and you're watching the Daily Roundup, our selection of some of the top news stories from around the world. Here are today's headlines. Russia has banned the export of oil to countries that are following Western price caps. Tunisia's government is set to implement austerity measures. Unions reject it and threaten a strike. The US Supreme Court allows the continuation of the racist Title 42 border controls. And Uruguayan unions mobilize against the government's pension reforms. First up, on Tuesday, the 27th of December, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a decree to ban Russian oil exports as a retaliatory measure to price caps advocated by the West. The new ban came in response to price controls on Russian oil taken up by the G7 grouping of nations earlier this month and adopted by the European Union as well as Australia. The decree will ban the supply of oil and petroleum products from Russia to any country that adopts the price cap in their contracts either directly or indirectly. The ban on oil supplies will take effect from the 1st of Feb next year and will be in place for 5 months until the 1st of July. Meanwhile, the Russian government is yet to determine the effective date on the supply of petroleum products. The decree also empowers the president to grant special permission for oil supplies to countries who fall under this ban. Earlier on the 5th of December, the G7 nations, along with the European Union and Australia, unilaterally imposed a price cap of $60 per barrel of seaborne oil imports from Russia. Currently, oil is trading upwards of $80 a barrel. The price cap was introduced by the G7 as an attempt to prevent financing Russia's military efforts in the Ukraine war. But several observers have noted that such third-party price caps do not conform to existing international laws on trade and commerce. Nor do the G7, who do not trade in Russian oil, have any stake in the matter to dictate terms of trade for other nations, for example India and China, who currently constitute key markets for Russian oil supplies. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov earlier lashed out at the EU's decision to not only reduce gas consumption but also abide by the price cap. He argued that the bloc has done the US's bidding at the expense of its own interest, considering Europe's high levels of dependence on Russian oil. As the Tunisian government announces a fresh wave of austerity measures, trade unions have declared mass protests. On Monday this week, the government announced a series of measures in the budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Shortly thereafter, the nation's largest trade union, the Tunisian General Labour Union or the UGTT, hit back at the government. The union group, with more than 1 million members, also stated that it will hold mass protests and occupy the streets soon to show its rejection of next year's austere budget. The new set of measures are to be passed even as inflation reaches 10.5% in 2023. The wave is primarily motivated by attempts to qualify for a bailout from the IMF. Earlier this year, Tunisia reached a staff-level agreement with the International Monetary Fund for a new bailout worth almost $2 billion as a 48-month extended fund facility. This bailout still awaits approval from the IMF's executive board. In the meantime, prices of basic goods are expected to skyrocket over the next few months. Earlier this month, the government announced a steep hike in the price of drinking water by 23%. Even though the government has assured that there will be subsidies on basic goods and they would not be lifted, trade unions have raised the alarm on planned cuts in those subsidies. As per the UGTT, subsidies on basic goods are also expected to be cut by as much as 30% and on fuel by as much as 26%. The union group also added that cuts in fuel subsidies will only contribute to further inflation in the price of basic goods. Inflation rates had spiraled to close to 10% in November this year. The United States Supreme Court on Tuesday allowed a request to halt measures to scale back the racist border restrictions known as Title 42 until legal challenges against it are concluded. In a split verdict of 5 against 4, the judges allowed the request filed by Republican Party-led states against the Biden administration's move to scale down the contentious border policy. This will now enable border forces to continue violent pushbacks against asylum seekers at US border entry points for the next several months. There is a legal challenge at federal courts by 19 Democratic Party-led states against Title 42, which was passed under Donald Trump's administration. The policy measure was passed as a theoretical control to spread the COVID-19 pandemic, but was widely criticized as being racist. It was also objected to by civil rights groups for summarily expelling migrants, even those with temporary protected status, without any access to due process. Title 42 has been used about 2.5 million times since March 2020 and was supposed to expire on the 21st of December. But the termination was halted 2 days before the deadline by Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts. The conservative majority in the US Supreme Court eventually allowed the Republican request against the expiration of the Title 42 policy. And finally, trade unions in Uruguay are mobilizing against the government's policy to reform pensions and retirement this week. The Uruguayan Bankers Association, the AEBU, gathered in front of the Legislative Palace against the Social Security reform imposed by the government of Luis Lacalle Pou as the legislature debates the reforms themselves. Similarly, the National Trade Union Center, PIT-CNT, which also mobilized, expressed that the great reforms must be decided among all and in favor of the great majorities. Among its more than 300 articles, the bill that the government is trying to push through creates a common system without parastatal funds. The bill also intends to raise the minimum retirement age from 60 to 65 and also modifies the ways in which pensions are calculated. The union movement defined the reform as regressive and anti-worker. The bill also cut down on early retirement benefits under the current Social Security system. It increases benefits and contributions for the private pension saving fund administrators, or AFAPs, among other modifications. Unions have also estimated that the reduction in future retirement will be anywhere between 10% to almost 40%. Trade unions have complained that retirements and pension contributions are already not worker-friendly. Uruguayan employees contribute nearly twice as much to these funds as their employers, while many have also alleged that big multinationals and big corporations receive exemptions from even those funding requirements. Unions argue that the new set of reforms will only make retired life more miserable for the working population. Before this mobilization, a group of public sector unions already announced a plan of action against this dispossession of the working class. Unions have also hinted that they may seek a referendum in case national legislature goes ahead and passes this bill. And that's a wrap on this episode of the Daily Roundup. As always, we invite you to head to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, for details on these stories as well as all of the other work we do. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram if you haven't already. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.